exactly 9 minutes. So around 8:30, I jump in. There's two of them
Okay.
to make sure because they're what's called a hard 9 minutes. Here we go. 100.1 FM, AM 1020, KDKA. This is Cars, Stars, and everything in between. He's the star, Richard Bazzi from Schultz Ford at schultzford.com. I am Bubba from 100.7 Star. And today we have an amazing guest that I'm so excited about from the moment I heard the announcement. Dr. Maroon, welcome to Cars, Stars, and everything in between.
Thanks so much, Bubba.
Richard, I know you're excited about this, and I know I am as well.
Well, I'm so excited because I'm not even sure. Really, I'm almost at a loss for words because I'm not sure where to begin. There's so much material and so many things to talk about. When Dr. Maroon and I spoke at one point, we talked about things. Well, first of all, it's all under the umbrella that we spoke of mental health, right? And how much of an impact mental health is having on our whole country right now. You know, seeing the statistics, 15 million people suffer from severe depression, with only half of those people actually getting treatment for it. Dr. Maroon, if you read his resume, I won't do that. I won't bore you with that. But I think has a 41-year history with the Pittsburgh Steelers organization and the NFL. Dr. Maroon, would you like to talk about that and just give us a little background on who you are from your perspective?
Sure, Richard. I'm a neurosurgeon at the University of Pittsburgh, and I, as you said, I've been affiliated with the Steelers in terms of a neurosurgical consultant for over 39, 40 years, and have done a considerable amount of work in the area of concussion, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, traumatic brain injury, as well as spinal and disc problems and problems of the brain of all sorts.
Well, so you do deal with the long-term effects of marijuana on adolescent teenagers also, right?
Well, I in terms of dealing with it, I'm very aware of the problems of marijuana and how it markedly affects the wiring diagram called the connectome of our brain, how our brains are really put together or wired, and how deleterious, how dangerous, how bad marijuana is for the adolescent brain. Once the brain is formed and connected and wired, it's a little more resilient to such toxins as marijuana and alcohol. However, adolescents, one in 4 kids or more will smoke marijuana in high school this year. This week.
Wow. So here's a quick question. At what point does the brain mature out of the adolescent phase that you're referring to?
You know, usually not until the 23, 24-year-old individual. So the kids who are smoking pot now are damaging their brains and how it's wired. It can lead to psychosis. It can lead to manic depression. It can lead to all sorts of bad problems because it's affecting how the tracks and the networks of the brain that are still developing and still connected get affected.
And you see that in your video, Calming the Brain. You when you see those images of what the brain actually looks like, I mean, I don't understand it, to be frank with you. I look at it and you talk about electric fields, and I mean, I don't get it. I don't understand how one brain is so different.
Richard, who does get it in terms of when you look at the complexity of the human brain? We have 86 billion, that's with B, 86 billion neurons. Each of those neurons is connected up to 5,000 other neurons, which makes 100 trillion synaptic connections. Okay? I mean, it's mind-boggling. The inner microcosm of our brain is equivalent to the outer microcosm of the Milky Way. We have 100 billion stars in the Milky Way. We have 100 billion neurons in our brain with all of those connections. So that when you say you don't get it, I can tell you very few people, no one really gets it because it's a area of exploration that it simply is beyond our comprehension at this point.
Then how do you talk about 21-year-olds that are being prescribed medical marijuana?
Well, again, there's a lot of things wrong, and there, Hippocrates, the father of medicine, said desperate diseases sometimes require desperate cures. I can't speak to a specific doctor prescribing marijuana for a 21-year-old. Maybe the patient has cancer. There's no question marijuana can be beneficial in patients with intractable pain, with cancer, but overall, I'm speaking generally. I'm looking across my room right now at a high school where I lived by, and I think of, one of every 4, if not higher, kids is going to smoke marijuana this month.
Wow.
And how it's going to affect how their brain is wired, particularly if it's heavy. The brain is quite resilient. It's very, very neuroplastic. We have a concept of neuroplasticity, how you and I are talking, our sight, our sounds, our touch, our smell, all gets inputted sensorily into our brain to form connections. Heraclitus, a Greek philosopher, said you can never put your foot into the same river twice.
Yes.
That is the definition of neuroplasticity in the brain. Wow. Every sensory input that we have minute by minute is modulating the connections of our brain and how our brain remembers, feels, reacts, touches.
So along those lines, seeing that yesterday, I think a mutual friend of ours, Bethany Wittmeyer, announced, and I saw this with great interest, that Jerome and Merrill Hodge are going to donate their brains.
Yeah.
And I thought, I have to be honest with you, that kind of frightened me a little bit. And I thought, I don't think I could make that commitment. But when they do that, what do you hope to see when you have people that do donate that for research?
What you're referring to, Richard, is the National Sports Brain Bank that was just initiated at the University of Pittsburgh. And basically, there was a report 5 years ago. A group in Boston looked at brains of deceased NFL players and concluded that 110 out of 111 of the brains they looked at had evidence of neurodegeneration or chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE. Well, there's a huge, obvious, and they admit this, a selection bias, in that the only brains they looked at were those individuals who had complained of problems prior to their demise. So to add good science to this whole discussion of CTE, the University of Pittsburgh, with the Chuck Knoll Foundation supporting it, and also the Richard King Mellon Foundation and the Pittsburgh Institute, the Pittsburgh Foundation, have started the National Sports Brain Bank. And this is for anyone who has played any contact sport in the past, who can donate their brains prior to their demise and go through a series of testing, verbal testing, online, determining what their present cognitive ability, their ability to process information, their memory is now, and then annually have these same tests. And then when there is a death, the brain is sent to the Pittsburgh Brain Bank, the University of Pittsburgh Brain Bank, which is the largest repository, one of the largest repositories in the country of patients with Alzheimer's disease and neurodegenerative disease, the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. So we have a huge repository that can be compared to normal and abnormal brains, and hopefully come up with a true neuropathological criteria for what is chronic traumatic encephalopathy. What are the criteria? How common is it? What are the symptoms? What can be done to prevent it? So that's the whole purpose. And Jerome and Merrill Hodge and I and Reg Haid, another neurosurgeon, donated our brains, and we have over 30 people just because of that announcement that have done so. And it's a long-term project. There's The commitment is just, yes, you are going to do a cognitive evaluation of you and have this on file, totally confidential, and do it annually and see if there's a decadence in your memory or your intelligence. And maybe there's some intervention that can be done to obviate that or slow it or prevent it. So that's what you're referring to. And I appreciate you mentioning that.
All right,
Yeah.
Dr. Maroon, this is Cars, Stars, and Everything in Between. More with Dr. Maroon when we return. Wow.
So much material here,
Wow.
Joe. So much.
Hang on one second. Dr. Maroon, I just want to let you know that Justin Strelzik was one of my dearest friends.
Yeah, I knew Justin.
Yeah, Justin was one of my dearest friends.
Yeah, that was certainly a major tragedy.
Yeah, I had lunch with him about 2-3 weeks before it happened. It was just there was something definitely off. All right, here we go. Hang on one second. Oh, so saving that file. And by the way, if you're just watching us live, thank you so much for watching us. We really appreciate you. As soon as it saves, we will get started with number 2. And here we go. 100.1 FM, AM 1020, KDKA. This is Cars, Stars, and Everything in Between. He's the star, Richard Bazzi from Schultz Ford at schultzford.com. I'm Bubba from 100.7 Star. And on with us today is Dr. Joseph Maroon. Wow. Richard, take it from here because I feel like we could talk forever. And this is unbelievable information.
Yes, I actually believe we can. Dr. Maroon, what is it you think you spend most of your time on in a day? Is it research? Is it surgeries? Is it because when you look at the brain and you talk about structural problems from maybe tumors or whatever, do you deal with that most of the day or research?
Richard, a few years ago, I wrote a book entitled Square One: A Simple Guide to a Balanced Life. And I think what I urge people to do on a daily basis is to draw a square. Okay, in your mind, whoever's listening to this, draw a square. On the top line now, write work. On the right side, write family and social. On the bottom, write spiritual. And on the other side, put physical. Work, family, spiritual, and physical. Now, Richard, I want you to do this. And Bubba, in your own minds, draw a line with how much effort you put on each of these in a daily basis.
Oh, wow.
So how long is your work line, Richard? How long is your family line? How long is your spiritual line? And how long is your physical? How much do you do physically on a daily basis?
It's definitely not a square.
Well, very few people have that. However, it gives you a nomogram to know what you need to focus on. At one time, I was very, very involved with my work. In fact, it was a virtual straight line.
Yes.
I had no family, or I neglected that part. Spirituality became atrophic, and I was 25 pounds overweight. Within a week, my father died, my family broke up, and I had to quit neurosurgery and literally move into a farmhouse in West Virginia and worked in a truck stop that my father bequeathed to my mother, heavily mortgaged. And for a year, I pumped gas and flipped hamburgers before discovering the square.
Wow. I
sat down and I saw there was no family, there was no spirituality, and there was no physical. And a banker who held the mortgage on the truck stop called me one day and said, "Joe, let's go for a run. You need to get out." I said, "I can't walk up a flight of steps without being short of breath." But I went down to the Triadelphia High School track in Wheeling, West Virginia, made it around 4 times and said, never again. But that night was the first night I slept in months. So I went back the next day and I did 1.25 miles, then 1.5 miles, then 2, 3, 4. And subsequently, I entered into a triathlon, and what was happening is I was rebooting my brain's neurochemistry. I was elevating my serotonin and my dopamine and my acetylcholine, and I was feeling better. I started to lose weight. My cardiovascular system improved. I picked up a Bible that I hadn't read in years, and I got reconnected to my faith and to what's really important. You know, what's what our the difficulty is, what's our purpose in life? And the purpose of life is a life of purpose.
Wow.
So what is your purpose? And I've discovered that my purpose. So when you ask me, what do I do on a daily basis? My purpose is very, very still committed to my work, teaching, education, research, mentoring. Very important with my family, and spirituality can enter into every aspect of those three sides of your faith and triangle, and the physical. So I make time every day for at least an hour to do cardiovascular fitness, stretching, resilience exercises, resistance, etc. So that's what my day's about.
Dr. Maroon, have you ever, as a neuroscientist, have you ever read the book Proof of Heaven? It's a neuroscientist that had a near-death experience.
Yeah. I have read it. I know the neurosurgeon. He was at Harvard when he wrote that, and
because it challenges. It's an interesting book because it challenges, science versus faith, and that's what basically the whole book's about. Because there's scientific evidence in near-death experiences or just something in the brain that kind of protects you from pain. But yet he was able to prove that that wasn't the case. Is that a challenge for you as a doctor?
Again, I go, there's so much we don't know. And when you talk about faith and religion, and you look at the various religions, Hinduism, Mohammedanism, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, people search for, again, the purpose-driven life. What is my purpose? These are questions that have been asked by any thoughtful individual since we shrunk down from the trees, actually. And everybody has to find their own way. But I'm a firm believer that there is a higher power, that there are so many things out of our control. And I still believe that the Bible, particularly the New Testament, has lessons of living, lessons for society that all should read.
Wow.
Dr. Maroon, I'm gonna jump around a little bit, because when I started, you and I first met, you talked about the square, and I'll be honest with you, I always find an excuse, and work is always my excuse. So I haven't really gotten into that. I haven't drawn the square yet, but as I do, and I started to look at some of your things, and I saw the video from 1961, and I saw the way our society treated mental health, and I see the way they were institutionalized. What's changed since then in terms of, for example, what people today would we diagnose that might be institutionalized, that might have been institutionalized in 1961 and today are treated?
Well, again, human nature, human personality, human mental health, depression, anxiety, postpartum depression. You're referring to a movie that I made in terms of entitled Frontal Lobotomy, Neuromodulation, Psychedelics, and Hyperbaric Oxygen Therapy. All modalities that have been used to modify behavior. In the 1800s, there was a hospital in London called the Bethlehem Hospital, which subsequently was changed to the name Bedlam. So you're familiar with the word Bedlam. It's Bedlam. And this was where individuals were chained to walls, put in straitjackets, and had all sorts of inhumane treatments, from water therapy, almost drowning, shock therapy, pulling out teeth, removing ovaries and everything else to try to modulate behavior, until psychotropic drugs were instituted in the 1950s. And instead of chains on the walls, psychotropic drugs were the psychopharmacological chains that were used to control behavior. And we're still evolving in that area. 50% of people who are depressed fail treatment of psychotropic drugs. There was just an article in the New England Journal of Medicine yesterday comparing electric shock therapy with ketamine therapy. Electric shock therapy is still very, very powerful tool in curing in modulating intractable depression. They found that ketamine therapy is just as effective as electric shock therapy, but without the without the memory problems that are associated with ECT. So we're evolving in this whole area. Again, psychedelics used the right way for PTSD probably has some value. How much? Again, this is all experimental.
So this is all, you're talking about pharmaceuticals, using electroceuticals, and just different things like TMS. I've experienced TMS, I think actually one of the Steelers is actually administering that somewhere here in the city. I think it might be John Cole, but that they use TMS, and maybe that's the wrong guy, but I don't recall who it is. I'm sorry, Joe.
Yeah, you're right, Dr. Wakeham, who works with John Cole,
yes,
working with veterans.
Yes, that's right. And so I have a little bit of experience with that, but I wonder, when you look at a brain, and can you tell, do you see anything genetic that might create some of these problems? Because you talk about PTSD, that's such a big topic for me because I'm very, very familiar with it, but what creates the PTSD? We talk about attachment problems with children and their mother from ages 0 to 5. Is that the same PTSD that we talk about in terms of, say, a military veteran?
The circuits are the same, Richard. You have in your brain, you have an area called the hippocampus, which serves memory, and then you have an area called the limbic system, or the emotional brain, and
yes,
an area called the amygdala, which means almond-like in their temporal lobes, that is the repository of all emotions. So if you have a traumatic experience, a woman's walking down the street, someone grabs her by the neck, takes her purse, hits her, that instantaneously releases a shot of epinephrine and cortisol, which heightens the encoding of that place, that memory, that smell, that touch in the brain. And this results in this memory being literally imprinted, encoded in the brain, and subsequently it's recalled anytime the woman or person would walk by this particular place, or a smell or a memory. So yes, it's all similar, it's all related, and it's a very, very difficult, obvious problem to treat, PTSD.
Wow, Dr. Maroon.
Bubba, I'm gonna extend for a minute here, and hopefully we find the time. But Dr. Maroon, some of the questions people ask: what do I do about mental illness? I think my son's so depressed. I think my son's got anxiety, or my daughter. And what do I do with that? Because the levels of care, you have psychologists, psychiatrists, we have electroceuticals, pharmaceuticals. Where would you guide people?
Wow, Richard, that's the obvious question. And in our present state of mental health care, you listed the healthcare specialists who work in this area: psychologists, psychiatrists, family members, friends, rabbis, priests, ministers. It's reaching out for counsel, wisdom for others who have been there perhaps, or who studied.
So integrating some form of talk therapy.
And integrating some form of talk therapy. But what is the most powerful antidepressant, Richard?
I can't answer that.
Physical activity, aerobic activity. The most powerful antidepressant compared to SSRIs and everything else is exercise, aerobic activity, physical activity. And, it saved my life, quite frankly. I literally was recalled to life because of that run around the high school track. And it resets your neurochemicals, as I said, your serotonin, your acetylcholine, without drugs, without the side effects of drugs. And it's the hardest thing to do, to open the door to the gym or to get on a treadmill or a stationary bike or take a walk consistently. But it's the most effective antidepressant that's free.
That's interesting. And Dr. Maroon, one final thing is I think you undersell yourself on, you didn't just have physical activity. I believe, if I read this properly, you did some triathlete kind of stuff, right? I think you did a triathlon. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, I basically, that run around the track. And again, it was feeling good, Richard. I want to work at my peak performance. That's my goal. As long as I'm, my goal is to die young, as late as possible.
Can I steal that? I love that. I want to steal that.
And to do that, I know I need to take care of my mind and body. The Romans said, "Mens sana in corpore sano," a healthy mind and a healthy body. To do that, I need both the physical and the spiritual components in my life on a daily basis.
Wow.
And the neurochemistry and the physiological changes that come from that are what enables me as an octogenarian to continue to do what I love.
That's fabulous.
Richard Bazzi, if we have not learned a lesson today, I don't know that we ever will. And Dr. Maroon, hopefully you can find some time to join us again, because there's so many routes that we could go in future conversations. Richard, if we could get Chelsea to rebook Dr. Maroon, I think it would be very important.
It would be wonderful to be able to share this with everybody else again. Just Dr. Maroon, thank you.
Dr. Maroon, thank you for joining us for Car Stars and